What do you say?
Let me call back to order.
Okay, the meeting is hereby called back to order. I believe Mr. Gunn, you are up first.
Yes, thank you very much. Tonight we have a presentation for you to continue to allow you to continue the discussion of property acquisition by eminent domain. And we'll start off with really a very brief overview of some of the growth information that we provided you over the last 12 months or so. And that is that we have grown for many, many years, and we expect that within the next 10 years we will have about 1,600 more students. A lot of that growth is in the South End, and certainly we have a need for the new elementary school number 18 that we are funded to build, and that will get started in a couple months, but as well a future high school number 4. And both of those two projects are on property that we own most of in the south end, southeast quadrant of the district. We're trying to purchase some more property, and that's the topic for tonight's discussion. This is a boundary map of the south end of the district. And in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a red rectangle. That is the property that we own. That is, as you can tell from the dashed black line, the property to the right and towards the downside of that, that is to the east and south of that, is outside the urban growth boundary. All of the areas to the north and to the west of that black line are inside the urban growth boundary. So you can see that our property that we own currently on 180th Street is inside the UGA, and we will be talking with you about property that's just north of that, just outside of the urban growth boundary. And for that purpose, we've shown this site plan. 180th Street goes left to right, so that's west to east along the south side of the property. The property we own is currently south of the dashed yellow line. Again, that's the urban growth boundary. The property that we're trying to acquire is north of that line. Will be primarily used for, well, it will be solely used for either an access road to 174th Street or for athletic fields for the new high school. They will not be used for buildings. Here is a different way of looking at that drawing, showing, again, in the shaded red area, both below and above the urban growth area, shows property that we currently own. So the Gutschmidt property is labeled here number 3, the Rampton property number 2, and the Giese, I think that's how you pronounce that, property is labeled number 1. One more view of this. We just wanted to make sure it was absolutely clear. From the dashed red line, the properties to the north and east of that line are outside the urban growth boundary, and properties to the south and west of that are inside. So as you can tell, once again, Gutschmidt, Rampton, and Giese properties are outside of the urban growth boundary. Some history on this. The Gutschmidt property is 1.1 acres. It is outside the urban growth area. And we originally had priced out our appraisal, and we had made offers to purchase that property based on that. And the appraisal value of that, it's on a different slide here, it was $328,040. So that was the appraisal amount that we'd come up with. And then last summer sometime, actually it was late summer, I think September or so, just as we were getting ready to do the hearing here about this property, we got an appraisal from Brian Gutschmidt, who lives in Alaska, and he provided an appraisal for this property. And it was based on the same basis as our appraisal was, which was for a property located outside the urban growth area. And so the maximum number of lots you could get on this property, which is zoned R5, which means 5-acre parcels, is 1 lot, and the appraisal came in at $375,000 from the Gutschmidt brother that lives in Alaska. So what we did in our just before we had the hearing here, the final action hearing, I think is what it was called, we added $10,000 onto that price, and that was what the offer was that we made to the Goochmet brothers to purchase their property. That extra $10,000 could have been used and still could be used by the owners of the property in whatever way that they wanted to. I understand that they jointly own the property, so they would have to work together to figure out how the proceeds from the purchase or the sale of the property, as well as the extra amount, how they would use that. But it could be used in any way that they wanted to, including attorney fees could be used for relocation costs, could be used for a variety of things. So fast forward a little bit more, just towards the end of, I think it was the middle to the end of December, that is another staff member, and I met with Bruce Goochmet, and he followed up quickly soon after that, his attorney did, and provided us an appraisal that was dated in September, although we didn't get it till December, and it was based on a value of that property as if it were inside the UGA, which we would consider that to be a speculative zoning because it is not inside the UGA. Our conversation with the county staff and our appraisers over the years have really, time after time, has led us to the conclusion that the county does not have any specific plan or is not willing to give us a plan or a timeline for when they would, if they ever would, consider expanding the UGA into these areas. We have some a little bit more information on that here in just a minute. I think that as we go forward, and ultimately the court, either a judge or a jury, will be deciding what the compensation should be that we would pay these owners. They will be looking at all these issues at that time as well. So I'm not trying to, win an argument or convince anyone, really just explain how we got the values that we did and what the conversations have been leading up to this point. So the original offers to purchase, as I said, were based on fair market values in 2015. We updated those appraisals in 2017. We actually successfully negotiated with 2 of the owners, 3 of them not so much, and we're proceeding right now with eminent domain on those 3 properties. And once again, we used Brian Goochmet's appraisal value for the the final action hearing offer that we made. The opt-out relocation assistance, when our attorneys explained to you at the hearing in September about your choice to opt out or not, the providing relocation assistance, it had to do with whether we were receiving federal grants, loans, or contributions for purchase of the property or construction of the building. And the answer is we are not, and so we presented to you at that time that we have a choice to opt out, and you elected to opt out at that time. So that is the status of this issue right now at this time. All 3 properties have stipulated to the district's use and possession and have agreed to move out of the properties, that is to vacate the properties by March 30th. In addition, we have already deposited funds in the court for the Giese purchase and the Goochmet purchase, meaning the dollar amounts that we offered to purchase the properties, which included the appraisals plus $10,000, we've already made those payments to the court. And Giese's have withdrawn that money and used that to purchase property already. The Goochmets can do the same now that we've deposited. We deposited that amount this morning. It was actually waiting for some paperwork that had to come in late last week from the owners of the property. So the purchase price, the school district's purchase of these properties is constrained, as you can tell from what it says there, by constitutional and statutory requirements. This was all covered by our attorneys at the hearing in September. If the property owners dispute our appraisal amounts, then they may present their own, which now we've received from the Goochmets, but not from the other 2 property owners. We are hoping to get those. And then we can negotiate the amount in negotiations, or it may go to a trial. Excuse me. Right now, the trial for establishing how much we would pay is scheduled for late April. And as I said, the owners of the property have agreed to vacate by March 30. This is the final slide I have for presentation tonight, and this is the some information from another appraiser that we use on some other property purchase acquisitions. Excuse me. So what we asked them is that we're also looking at purchasing some other property that is outside of the urban growth area. So they did a lot of research on this, and they reported back some information, and I have printed it up here for you to understand. So these are excerpts from another appraisal that was done by the Valbridge property appraisers or advisors. And it says, it is our understanding that there is no further expansion of the county's southwest urban growth area anticipated within the 10-year planning horizon between 2015 and 2025. And then it gives some information about a potential update of the comprehensive plan that the county will undertake with no clear result, being forecasted for that activity. And that it should be noted that the county planning department has indicated there's no likelihood of a significant change based on current conditions. This is consistent with our planner. We use pretty consistently a couple of different land use planners, and they help us with getting land use permits for this area, and they've confirmed that this is the information that they also get from county staff. So with that, I would take another drink of water and answer any questions.
Thank you very much. This is very good information to have. Certainly helps us better understand the parameters of eminent domain negotiations. And with that, I'd like to open it up to directors to ask questions of Mr. Gunn, should you have any. Director Wenta.
Yes, Mike, thank you for the report. So I just want to ask clarifying questions and make sure that I understand this correctly.
Sure.
We had an appraisal for $375,000 from Brian Gutschmidt, and then we had a second appraisal from Bruce Gutschmidt of $895,000, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Actually, we received these appraisals from their attorneys.
Okay, thank you. And can you describe in a little bit more detail our experience with the county as it relates to speculative UGA expansion? What I heard you say is that, I think it was your last slide, the second bullet point down, that rarely, if ever, are they willing to commit to some type of process, in this case, 8 years out. Has that been our experience?
So we've actually, as a school district, not requested that the county change or expand the UGA. We've never gone through a formal request process. The entire area in the southeast quadrant here that we have shown you, most of that, if not all of it, was basically requested to be included in the county's expansion of the UGA. It was like 10 or 15 years ago, and the county declined to do so at that time. They added a few properties along this area, but as you can tell, most of it was not approved to be included in the UGA.
Question? The Hampton property, is it mentioned here? Have we deposited money into their account, or do we have plans on that? And do they still live on their property or not?
The Hampton?
If I'm saying the name right.
Rampton.
Rampton, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
My understanding is Scott Rampton is still living on the property. Although he may well have moved off, I just haven't heard from him in a couple of months. I know he is required to move out by March 30th.
But you mentioned specifically we've deposited funds for the Giese and Gutschmidt. Have we deposited funds for Rampton?
No, we have not.
Is that upon request or something?
It is, and it started with the Gieses because they needed to have access to some money so they could move.
Okay.
So we negotiated a revised stipulation, which is the formal document that sets out the timelines for all of this. And because we had done it for the Gieses, we decided about a month ago, so to offer that same deal to the Gutschmidt brothers. And we've just recently concluded that revision.
Okay, and then removing that money, because that's based on our last offer plus the 10,000.
Yes.
If the court settles for differently, we would pay the difference if it was a higher amount.
Yes.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
I have one question.
Okay.
When you say all parties have stipulated that to the district.
Can you use
so
your
you
microphone just a little bit closer?
When you said that all parties have stipulated to the district's use and possession with a March 30 date, move-out date, what does that mean? That they have agreed that they all will move out the property by that date?
It means that the court has determined that our declaration, I think it is, of use and public use and necessity was upheld or approved.
Okay.
And that there was one of the owners had contested that, and that was the Giesies and their attorney. And so the court, the judge ultimately ruled against them and confirmed that the decision you made based on your hearing was the appropriate decision. So that basically cleared the way for us to have clear what's called use and necessity for the property. At that point, and I'll ask Jerry if he wants to add to this, but at that point, really the only remaining question is how much the court or the parties can decide or agree on to pay the owners for the property. So the only questions remaining now are how much.
Right. Well, and I would.
Yes.
So just as a point of clarification, under the Constitution, when you initiate a condemnation, you're not entitled to use the property until the jury until you reach a final settlement or the jury makes an award and you pay the money into court. But the property owners are not entitled to attorney's fees. So the state legislature passed a statute that was intended to encourage property owners to agree to early possession and use. And if the property owners agree to early possession and use and the final result exceeds our best offer by 10% or more, they get their attorney's fees. So it's a statutory incentive to give early possession. All three owner groups have agreed to grant early possession in exchange for that attorney's fees right.
Okay.
So at this point, all three owners have agreed to this. It's called the stipulation, and it sets forth all of the conditions required, including a date for them to move out.
I don't know if you can speak to this, but are we currently in settlement negotiations? I know trial is set for late April, but when will those settlement talks just begin?
We haven't scheduled any mediation or discussions right now. I have been requesting our attorneys contact the attorneys for the other sides and request such a conversation to begin, and I believe that Jerry and his partner, the other associates, David Steele, have requested that, but we have not yet begun that.
We don't have dates for
Okay.
mediation.
Okay.
There is a plan that will move through settlement discussions in some kind of an organized way sooner rather than later.
But we have paid $385,000 into
The court, for the
that
Gutschmidts, yes.
the Gutschmidts could have access to immediately.
They, I think it takes a week or so. There's some paperwork between that. The court now becomes the escrow agent. They have to make sure the taxes are covered and whatever thing, and that it's split up as the brothers may agree upon between the parties. But it's in the court's control to release it to the Gutschmidt brothers at this point.
Prior to settlement or trial.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
How common is it for appraisers to appraise a piece of property that may be outside the UGA or inside the UGA differently than where it is currently zoned?
I'm going to say that the appraisers will pretty much take their lead from what the owner tells them to do. So if I'm just going to say it that way and say, we have given our appraisers very clear instructions that they are to use the current zoning as the basis for their appraisal.
Well, actually.
That's what go ahead.
The appraiser has, I'm sorry, the appraisers both for the district and for the owners have an obligation under the appraisal rules to make an independent determination
Okay.
of whether the existing zoning is the highest and best use.
Okay.
That is one of the main basic determinations an appraiser makes in assessing the value of property. And so the question here is whether it is appropriate to value the property as though it has been or in the reasonably near future would be rezoned to a higher use, or whether it's more likely to stay at its current zoning designation for the foreseeable future. And that can make, as these appraisal differences show, a fairly dramatic difference in the value of property.
So different appraisers are going to have different opinions
Different
about that.
appraisers can have different opinions. We can have fights about whose opinion is more reasonable, and that's just part of the process.
Okay.
This is not unusual, by the way.
Right.
For appraisers to disagree, within some range. Given the same assumptions, if you change the assumptions, you're liable to get a very different result.
Okay.
Thank you, Jerry, by the way.
Directors, do you have any additional comments or questions for Mr. Gunn? Mr. Lutz? I have to just mention at this point, there is no public comment during this meeting.
Okay, I'll just.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for the information and answering the questions. I'd like to thank the directors also for your time this evening and for your thoughtful questions. The laws governing the process of eminent domain are written to protect both property owners and public resources. However, laws don't always reflect the difficulties people face when they are in the midst of a legal process. The process of eminent domain affects property owners, our community, and families, and it is one of the most difficult decisions a governing body will ever face. As Mr. Gunn previously mentioned, historically, school districts in our state do not pay relocation fees as part of the eminent domain process if federal funds are not used to purchase properties or build a school. Because of that history, we followed the precedents and the advice of legal counsel in the eminent domain process. At the January 9th board meeting, Mr. Gutschmidt, an owner of one of the properties, shared the hardship that he and his partners face moving from the property jointly owned with his out-of-state brother. We empathize with those challenges, and we have carefully considered the challenges he brought to our attention and the challenges and rights of the other property owners who have also been displaced, and our responsibility as stewards of public funds. Tonight, we met in executive session to learn more from legal counsel about eminent domain and the options we have as a publicly elected board to charge to solve school overcrowding now and into the future and abide by the laws governing use of public funds. As a result of this discussion, I would like to propose a motion to direct the superintendent to assess and include reasonable and allowable costs when negotiating settlement agreements, to include full, fair, and just compensation for the property, consideration of other property owner expenses, such as moving expenses and humanitarian concerns, while maintaining prudent and equitable use of taxpayer funds. At this time, I'd like to call for a motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved by Director Mitchell and seconded by Director Andrews. Is there any discussion on this motion?
I'd like to just clarify, if I might. For this motion, this would include all three property owners. Even, we appreciate Mr. Goochman coming to us with his concerns. We understand that. This is the hardest thing we have to do. Even though the Geeseys have already left, we would apply this to all three to be fair and just.
That is correct, yes.
I'd like to add too, I understand of the nature of the concerns on a humanitarian basis. I feel for the property owners, but I just want to make sure that we are considering a full, fair, and just compensation for their property. Thank you.
What?
I would just add, this is a really difficult thing to do. My very first meeting as a board member 10 years ago, we had this conversation, and quite honestly, I remember thinking, what have I gotten into? Because it was so painful. Luckily, the recession hit and we were able to obtain this parcel at a reasonable cost. So, you know, we've recognized this need in the district for a decade, knowing our district is growing. I'm sorry that we're having to have this painful conversation again, and I think that the motion you've proposed will provide for compensating the peoples whose property we have to take, but also look out for the taxpayers as well. But look, you know, accommodate all needs of all parties. But it is very difficult, as we all know.
Okay, with that, I would like to call for a vote. All directors in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The motion carries. With that?
Being no further business.
With that, there is no further business. Excuse me. There is no further business. Meeting tonight, we are adjourned.